Hi, welcome to the Gear Garage. My name is Zach, and this is my show about whitewater things. In today's episode, I want to finish this series of videos about catching eddies and oar boats. And the first method we talked about 2 episodes ago was just pulling over to an eddy. I'm going to call this the pulling method, where you just turn your boat and you ferry over like this, and you cross the eddy line at not the best angle, so you kind of have to like fiddle with the eddy and you eventually catch it. This is the most conservative way to do it, but it's not the most effective. And so to make it more effective, you want to cross the eddy line at near 90 degrees so you pierce through the eddy. So the next technique that we introduced in the last video was to push on the oars, like push down. It's the pushing method. Push, 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 so your bow enters at a little more than 90 degrees or less, however you measure 90 degrees. But at this aggressive angle, it'll hit the eddy, start turning. You'll cross it at 90 degrees and you'll shoot into the eddy. And this is a great method. You have great visibility of where you're going, but the downside is by pushing downstream, you're pushing faster than the current. So things happen really fast. So it's incredibly difficult to get your position, your speed, and your angle all at the same time. Basically, timing is very, very difficult pushing because you're going faster than the current. And also you're using your pushing muscles, which are stronger than your pulling muscles. And so you have to be very well timed to get this right. To fix this, there's another technique. This is called the downstream ferry. So what you do is you turn the boat backwards, you go stern first, and you pull on the oars. And pulling, you're very strong. The downside is you can't exactly see where you're going. So you have to have a good sense of where you are, and you have to be looking over your shoulder occasionally to do it correctly. So the same thing, you pull, 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 pull. Once the stern gets in there, it kind of swings the boat, it crosses about 90 degrees, and you're facing downstream. And this is, again, a very effective method, especially if the eddy line is really hard to cross. Some eddy lines are just very distinct, there's like a difference in height between them. Or if there's laterals guarding the eddy. A lot of times there'll be laterals here, and you have to push through the laterals. That's hard to do on a push, but if you turn around, you can break through the laterals and or break through the eddy line. And with this power, if this on the oars, you can if you can get the position right, you can get speed and momentum. I use speed if I'm talking about light boats, and the idea of momentum if it's a heavy boat. But you can pull speed by pulling on the oars, and then the angle because you're piercing through the eddy at about 90 degrees. And again, the timing is just getting all of this together. So it's a very effective method, but it's difficult because you don't really see where you're going. And I'm a big fan of this method. I call it the downstream ferry. People also call this poweling. It's great on the Grand Canyon, where John Wesley Powell ran all the rapids of the Colorado River. And a lot of them have big laterals guarding them, and they're big eddy fences, so he'd pull downstream to pull through them. Again, that's why some people call this poweling. I call the downstream ferry because you're facing downstream and you're ferrying in a way that's faster than the current. So that's a lot of words. Hopefully that all makes sense. But here's some video to share, some examples to kind of show what it looks like when you're doing it. In this first example, the raft is doing the push method, like pushing forward, and he's doing the best he can, but he's not strong on the push, so he catches the eddy pretty low. You can see the cataract is pulling, so this is a downstream ferry. He's pulling downstream, and he's built up some great velocity with those pulls. He has a great position right below the rock. He's going to power right into the eddy, no problem. And you can see that the cataract caught it higher than the raft, in large part because he used the downstream ferry technique. Now here's that raft, again, doing a downstream ferry at a different spot. He does a perfect job. His position is perfect right below the rocks. He has good velocity to cross the eddy line, and the angle is pretty close to 90 degrees, and you can see you can't catch that eddy higher. That was pretty much perfect. Here's the cataract doing it on the push method. He does a good job too, but isn't able to catch it as high. Again, because pushing isn't as strong as pulling. Here's that black raft again. He's turning the boat around, turning it so it's sort of downstream. This is like about 90 degrees, pretty far below where he could have started, right? He could be about a good 5 feet higher, but he has great angle to cross the eddy line on a pull and is able to pull himself beautifully across the eddy line, even though he's a little bit low in the eddy, to do a nice eddy catch. So this is an 18-foot gear raft on the middle fork of the Salmon River. I'm running Tappan Falls here. And there's a nice eddy down there I want to catch. And I want to catch it high so I can provide safety for the kayaks coming down. And so what I'm gonna do first, I'm gonna move to the left. You can see I'm pulling myself to the left so I can position myself to build momentum from the left to the right. And I'm gonna use the word momentum here instead of speed because a big gearboat has momentum, it has a lot of mass. And so now that I'm on the left side, I can start my downstream ferry so I can build momentum from the left side to the right side. I'm pulling down to cross the eddy line. I crossed it right there at about 90 degrees, and the boat stops in the top of the eddy. One small disadvantage of the downstream ferry is when you finish, you are facing downstream. And so for me, I want to see visually what's happening upstream to provide safety. So I'll typically spin the boat around so I have a good visual in other boats, and I can quickly push out of the eddy to provide some sort of safety if I need to. So to review, the downstream ferry is a really powerful method for catching eddies and oarboats, but it's tricky, it's harder, it takes practice, and that's because when you're pulling downstream, you're pulling faster than the current and you have a lot of speed, so getting your position right is really tough. This is the hard part. You have to practice a lot to figure out how to look over your shoulder and go faster than the current and get yourself as high in the eddy as you can. But if you are able to do that, because you're able to pull, you can move the boat, you have good speed or momentum depending on whether you're a heavy boat or light boat. So you have this, and your angle is typically about 90 degrees, so you can pierce through the eddy really well. This is just an awesome technique, but something that requires some practice because again, it is tricky looking over your shoulder and getting that spot. And just one thing, we talked a lot about these three techniques for catching eddies. Again, the pulling over like this and sliding into the eddy, the pushing to pierce through the eddy line, and the downstream ferry to kind of come through like that. And they are different methods, and they have different pluses and minuses, and they require different amounts of skill. But know that once you have all three of these down, sometimes use a hybrid of the three or two of them. A pretty common thing is to use the pulling method, and at the last minute use a downstream ferry. So a very common method a lot of people use is they pull, and they spin the boat and then pierce the eddy line on a pull. And so, again, these are the foundational techniques, but you can sort of mix and match them as you get better to be more effective, to pick the right single technique or combinations of techniques to catch a particular eddy in a particular boat. Because it's important to note, it's not just the eddies here, it's the boat you're in. Is it a raft or a cataract? Is it heavy? Is it light? Does it have rock or does it not have rock? Or all kinds of things. Is it wide? Does it have the right size oars? All kinds of things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this series on catching eddies. If you have questions, add them in the comment section below. It's fun to talk about. If I'm wrong or I'm just dumb or I just don't know what I'm talking about, you can tell me that too. And tell me, and like you can educate all of us in the comments below. I learned from this, so if there's some magical fourth technique or some terminology I used wrong, please add in the comments so I can learn and we can have a discussion. And yep, that's it. Please like and subscribe as always, and see you in the next episode. Thanks.